Yeah, there we go. All right, we got it. Kim Griffin from Griffin Occupational Therapy. It's and a bunch of other stuff. I'll get you to introduce yourself in a minute. It's wonderful to have you here. Kim's an Aussie living in the UK. I did say London, but you're outside by the looks of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So London.
In Southern 25. I get to
Oh, you're in London. There you go.
Straight to London.
Yeah, there you go. So these guys are drinking wine and I'm drinking coffee because it's 8 o'clock in the morning here, and what is it, about 1 o'clock there? So it's definitely on
2 and 1, yeah.
1 o'clock, and it's always 1 o'clock in France. And so Mark's trekking up the hill, I assume, without his glass of wine. But
correct. Yep.
but great to have you both here. Mark, if you want to do you want to hold still and just do a quick introduction. I don't know if you've got enough bandwidth. Mark's
it should be good.
All right.
I don't know if the background's going to come in, but yes, I am in the French Alps. Just walked up the hill, lost my breath for a minute. Just trying to get a bit more.
It's a bit mean, mate. I'm making you do all the talking in your puff.
Oh. Just trying to get a bit better internet. It's been having problems this week. But today we have Kim Griffin with us. Now, I met Kim 13 years ago in a hostel in Madrid, wasn't it, Kim?
Yep.
Yeah, I was talking with another British guy from lived in Morocco. Kim overheard the Aussie accent, popped in and said g'day, and we've been friends ever since. Kim decided to commence a bit of an entrepreneurial journey a couple of years ago, so reached out to us at Business and Bare Feet, tossed us around a few ideas, and she ran a bit of a pilot, which we'll hear about shortly and see where it's gone. Yeah. So Kim, welcome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Jono? Great to have you here. Yeah, no, good, man. Catch your breath. So Kim, it's wonderful, and this is our first time connecting, and it's funny, Mark talks about, you sort of bump into an Aussie somewhere and you connect, and it's like your mates for life, right? It's one of those funny things that Australians do very, very well. But Kim, tell us a bit about what you're doing right now, and and then we'll go in your backstory, how you ended up in the UK, and then some of the projects you're working on.
Okay, so I am what's called an occupational therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Most people have no idea what that really means, so I'll explain that first.
It's easier to say when you just say OT.
Yeah. But then people don't know what that means. So we'll start with the definition and then we'll move forward. So occupational therapy is a very broad profession, and we sit alongside speech therapists, physiotherapists, dietitians within what's called allied health. So we're not doctors, we're not nurses. We are essentially the glue in between those things that keeps everybody being rehabilitated and sort of does all the support in the middle. If you think of the term occupation as activity rather than work, so occupational therapists help from anything to teaching you how to get on a bus, teaching you how to make a cup of tea, to helping you get dressed, to potentially helping you drive a car. And my background's working in pediatrics, so my background's working with children. And it looks like I'm really laggy, and I don't know.
No, you're good.
That's okay.
I'm going to shut down. I've got a couple of other windows open. I'm just going to shut all of them down because Zoom was really laggy earlier on as well.
Well, you're on a Microsoft machine. That doesn't help.
Oh.
I have the same tech.
I knew that to get a rise from Mark.
We have the same tech. So.
Yeah, there you go. Look at
the
clock.
In fact, Kim was working remotely in France with us last week, and she pulled out her Surface Pro, and we sat down there on the big long table and got a little bit of internet, and we had a Surface Pro party. It was 3 of us lined up there for a while.
Beautiful. There you go. Surface Pro is a nice machine.
Yeah.
But it doesn't break down after 12 months.
Yeah, I am. Well, mine's 2 years old nearly, so
there you go. You've got an extended life out of yours.
I'm terrified of cracking the screen though. Like absolutely terrified that I'm just gonna break it.
Yeah.
I literally have one of the childproof cases around it. Came in handy the first yeah, the first week I had it, I was actually at a university hall for some training, and at those like seats that have got the little fold down desks, and I pushed it back a bit on the desk, and the stand went off the back of the desk and the whole thing flipped and fell. So yeah, it paid for itself.
I thought you were going to talk about one of your patients, one of your clients, I should
say. No. This is my clumsiness. So so I ended up as a children's occupational therapist, and most children's occupational therapists have a real desire to be a children's occupational therapist when they graduate. I fell into pediatrics just because that was, at the time, I'm from Townsville. I studied in Townsville, which is in North Queensland, so the northeast coast of Australia. And I just through circumstance needed to find a job up there at the time. And the only job I could get was a maternity cover working in an early intervention team. So I spent my first 12 months out of university working with children from 0 to 5, very much a lot of premature babies, a lot of cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, and a little bit of autism at that time. But essentially, because Cairns is quite small, we covered Cairns, and we used to do the outreach up into the Cape. I didn't do the outreach, but my team members used to do the outreach up into the Cape as well. And then from that job, I then ended up at the hospital in their children's position, which covered all of the school-based stuff. So I was helping kids with handwriting and helping children that had been burnt. I was, again, the only children's OT at the hospital. So I covered, if they break their leg, I'd go and sort that out. If they stepped on a fire and had burns on their feet, I'd support that. It's funny, I was chatting to a friend of mine also from Townsville recently, and I used to do all the telehealth with Brisbane for burns. And like, this is back in 2002. So we were joking that we're actually quite ahead for COVID because everybody's now doing telehealth. But we're like, well, we were doing that back because she was in Charleville, which is really in the countryside, like rural. And we would do all the sort of telehealth down to Brisbane. Yeah, and then from there, I wanted to travel. So I moved over to the UK, and I've worked in a lot of different places in the UK, in schools, in public health, in private practice, in social services. I've done a couple of years in Ireland as well. And I came back to London in 2010, and I was working in private practice and supporting lots. I've really moved into supporting children with autism and sensory difficulties or differences. So the children that might find noises overwhelming or not like the feeling of their clothing, or they might have really poor coordination, dyspraxia, poor handwriting. And that's sort of been my focus. And I've done a lot of additional training in that area. And in 2017, I was quite frustrated by the lack of affordable training and support for parents and teachers. And there was also very little online at the time. And what was online, although that's changing now, in 2017, it was very much people had just filmed maybe a face-to-face presentation they'd done. So it wasn't designed to be taught online, and it was just an hour or 2 hours of this person standing up the front. If they made a mistake, they made a mistake. If you couldn't see the slides, too bad. None of it was particularly good quality. So I wanted to take my knowledge online to, instead of help one child at a time, to be able to help multiple families and teachers. And I also wanted to make it affordable because I also was frustrated by the costs that essentially, who is the main person providing the training in the UK at the time, the cost was really high, and I didn't think it was accessible for families and teachers. You know, it was prohibitive for some of them. So that's when my entrepreneurial journey started, I suppose.
I love that almost wince when you said entrepreneurial.
It is, and I'm going to call it that because I still don't, like, it's not, I would never describe myself as an entrepreneur. I still describe myself as an entrepreneur.
Hold on. I'm going to jump ahead. Kim, since COVID launched, how many customers have you signed up?
Well, COVID, being online, I've actually had huge growth through COVID. So I've had nearly 4,000 students join since the end of March. So
yeah, but I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm just an OT working in private practice.
Well, Mark, if we go back to the conversation we had with Mike Baer, a few months ago now, he said, actually, it's funny because we kind of associate the entrepreneur with, almost someone like Mark, who's a little bit crazy,
Well, yep. Trying hard.
No, yeah, that's right. You don't have to try, man. And but it's kind of they're able to talk their way in and out of any situation. They're really lively. They're always trying stuff. They're on the edge. And there's an element of that. But he was really saying that the word undertaker actually comes from the French word, which means to undertake. The word entrepreneur comes from the word undertaker, which means to undertake an activity. And it's actually exactly what you've done. So you are an entrepreneur.
It's funny because I still, even at events or because I've been on, my journey has taken me onto a couple of incubators, and you go to networking events and stuff like that, and I always notice in the room that there's like founder or a CEO or CTO or like all these bits, and my badge still reads occupational therapist. Like I still fill it in as occupational therapist, because that and I must say, if you'd asked me 3 years ago, I would have said, actually, I really want to stop my clinical practice and I want to move to completely online. But through my journey, what I've realized is at the core of what I'm doing is occupational therapy and support with that sort of specialty. And to keep my registration, it's much easier to keep doing clinical stuff. And I've realized that actually my 2 days a week that I still do in school is really valuable for me in terms of just keeping my foot in, keeping my understanding of situations current. And I'm not sure if I'll ever fully give up that bit of clinical, because I think it adds to what I'm doing, and it also energizes me as well. So
I think you're speaking to a dilemma that a lot of people in business have, and particularly when you start building online presence, right? Because if you start building a product that you're really going to sell online, it's like training and those sorts of things, or anything. I mean, even in my world in coaching, we can deliver a lot online, but there's something about that energy of being, you always need to have that component of face to face. And it's almost, I don't know, the way I shifted it was almost like that became my laboratory, right? They're the things I do, and they kind of teach me for all the rest of the stuff. So I'll always have that component, but it's about loving people too. And just seeing the faces and seeing the difference and all those sorts of things. I'm sure you meet some really special patients.
But so Kim, you decided to write a bit of a coaching program, a little bit of a training program.
So I took I'm just going to shut my window a bit to see if I can knock the traffic noise down a little bit, because it's been quite humid here, so it's fully open.
For the record, Kim is in London, and she just said it was humid.
Honestly, it's been like 35 degrees.
It's gotta be at least 15 degrees. No, I'm sorry, 35. Wow.
It's been 35 degrees, completely still, and we actually had I actually had a proper rain. That big rain, like tropical rain almost. It smelled like rain, and it was big drops of rain. It was we've got thunderstorms and stuff, so it's
wow, real tropical weather. What's happening, London?
Yeah, I know.
We got Mark Grills in the background. He's
I'm just trying to find somewhere more comfortable.
He'll string up his hammock made of leaves.
That's it. So essentially, what I've done is taken the training that I used to deliver face-to-face, and I've adapted it for online. And I've created, at the moment, I've got training on sensory processing disorder, or sensory processing. So what that is, what it looks like, and how you can help children at home and school if they have got some sensory issues or sensory differences. And I've also taken my knowledge on pencil grasp and fine motor skills and turned that into a second program. And I've done a fine motor activity program as well. So I've got sort of 3 products as such that I've created.
How did you start? What was the first couple of months like?
The first thing I actually did was go and do a video editing course, because I was like, okay, I need to know how to.
That sounds like a good idea, Mark.
Yeah. So I actually went in April 2017. I went and did a video editing course at, I always forget the name of it. there's this awesome study place near Covent Garden in London, and it's all adult learning, and they've got amazing courses. So I went there and I did this fantastic course with a lady named Lily. And then that summer I wrote and filmed, and I did a website building course for WordPress, and I got kind of a basic website up and running. And in the October, I launched sort of my first course as such as a test. So I sent it out to, I had nearly 300 people, no, just over 300 people join actually. And I set it out for free. I just wanted the feedback to sort of get the understanding on it. So I suppose in some ways I did a bit of testing, but I look at the testing I do now 3 years later, and it's completely different to the testing that I was doing then. Like then it was very much just like, well, here's my idea, give me a bit of feedback, but I'm not.
But I imagine in your world, particularly in the medical world in particular, the constant improvement is just part of your DNA. You're always looking for new research.
Well, it is, and I've just this month launched, although it's been pre-launching since April, but the official launch was the 1st of August, and it's it's technically the 4th version. So the first version that I filmed, and I only filmed a little bit, I filmed probably a quarter of it. The video was unusable. It was so bad it was so bad I couldn't use it. And this round I've actually had someone help me with the filming, and I'm still doing the editing, but like I'm about to add some stuff onto it. But I've done a questionnaire. I've literally embedded a questionnaire into the training at the moment with, what more do you want? Because I've sort of thought, do people want live Q&A? Do they want recorded Q&A? Do they want a workbook? And I've kind of put down all the things that I thought might be useful add-ons, and I've asked people to essentially rank them as to what they want. And that's going to guide my next kind of steps. Whereas before, I very much.
I remember those early days well, because you downloaded our
Business Benefit, first 100 days or first 100 customers, I forget.
Yeah, and you said, right, I'm going to do some tests, but I'm not going to put all my money into everything. I'm going to do a test, and you put out some of these videos, you put out a program, you put it out for free, and then I think it was halfway through the month, you sent me a note or called me up and said, Mark, I've got 120 people that have just signed up. Is that good or not? I said, what, in 2 weeks? That's really good. And another week later I've got 200 people. Is that good? I said, great. You've got enough proof. Cut it off. Start charging money. She goes, oh no, I can't. I told him it was free for the whole month. So what did you end up giving away tens of thousands of pounds worth of free training during your test?
I suppose so, but I'm not sure.
Dollars in Australia.
When I look at then the January when I was when I started charging, there was only maybe 3 or 4 people in the first month. So I don't think, I don't see it like that, because I'm sure that because I didn't have. Again, I know this now, but I hadn't done a very good job at creating audience as such. So I'm working a lot more now on creating audience and even getting my own name out there. So I'm trying to, I had 4 conferences booked this year, all of which have been postponed. And I self-published 2 books, but I've actually got a contract with Bloomsbury, with very noisy drivers in I have a contract with Bloomsbury now to actually write a book for their 100 Ideas series, which is a series they do for teachers. So I'm trying, I read a book, actually it's by another Aussie, I think, Key Person of Influence. I read that at the start of the year. Yeah. And it really, I was like, actually that makes sense, especially for what I'm doing, because it is that sort of piece of around the expertise.
It's personality. There's a lot of personality and intellect-based content in what you're doing. Yes.
Yeah. So I still put the company, because I never wanted it to be me, because I want it to be a brand. Like I always wanted it to be something I could hand over, because the therapist that I was working with when I set it up, she had quite a reasonably big clinic, but she'd never branded it as such, and she was looking to sell it, to move and to sell it, and actually in the end she didn't end up selling it because there was really nothing. She'd built it around herself, rather than around itself. So I was very conscious that I wanted it to be a thing on its own. Even though I am the front of it, I still want it to be known as sort of Griffin Occupational Therapy rather than Kim.
Yep.
And I'm hoping I'm doing an okay job with that.
You didn't have a name, I don't think, when you started. You know, that actually came later because of that dilemma.
I had a pretty average logo as well. I have a lovely logo now, but my first... I've got a really nice slide which I used in a presentation I did at the beginning of the year. It's literally like the progression of Griffin OT, and I just used the logo, like the original one, and then the second, and then the current one, as a sort of growing up in a lot of ways. So I've just taken that forward. The first year was definitely I joined Cambridge, so the first 6 months was incredibly slow. But again, I was still working 6 days a week. So I was doing this and still working. So I would do it in the evenings, on the weekends. And because I work in schools, I get school holidays. So I was sort of jamming my school holidays full of getting stuff done, and then nothing would get done for 3 or 4 months. So yeah, the first 6 months were incredibly slow. I would say the first 3 years were very slow, and I've definitely had a huge boost from COVID. And I think my growth last year was 2.5 times that of 2018. So like the growth was happening, but I was expecting to be where I am now probably in another 2 years. So it's really exciting to kind of be there already and kind of be able to start it. It actually feels quite real now. Like I was talking to my non-exec directors around contingency planning, because I'm like, well, actually I've now got people paying for my stuff. So what happens and I'm still running everything in the background. So it's sort of that, what happens if something happens to me? And that I never would have been thinking about that in 2017. So in 2018, just pure by chance, really, a friend of mine's girlfriend was doing her MBA in Cambridge, and she came across the social ventures department of Cambridge Business School, Judge Business School, and they were doing a weekender on social entrepreneurship, and she was really keen to go to it, but you needed to have a business to go to it. So she's kind of like, oh, and she knew what I was doing. She's like, well, maybe you could register and I could come with you. So it kind of met both our purposes. And from there, I ended up applying for their 12-month incubator. And I'd never even heard of incubators at that point. Like I had no idea that sort of type of support even existed. So I was really fortunate to find out about that in the way I did, and then to be chosen as one of their cohort for that sort of 12 months of support. And they were really quite instrumental in starting me to look at audience, and also to look at, because I always wanted it to be affordable. So they were really like, well, how are you going to embed that into your legal structure? Like, how do you as a profit-making company embed sort of affordability? So currently we index our pricing to the national minimum wage, because that was the clearest way I could figure out a mathematical formula that nobody could argue with. Sort of. And one of my ideas was like, oh, maybe I'll just be like, we're going to charge half what our competition charges. But the guy that was sitting next to me at the time was like, yeah, but that just means your competition needs to reduce their prices for, say, 6 months and run you out of business. So I was like, okay, that's not really good. That's not the best idea. So then I was literally spent like 3 hours trying to figure out, how do you define affordability? So yeah, I kind of had a price in mind, and then I was trying to figure out how to make that work. And
rather than the other way around.
Yeah, so then indexing to the national minimum wage seemed to be an answer for me. And it's something I get challenged on my pricing all the time, because a lot of mentors will say, well, if it's too cheap, people won't value it, or so I get challenged on my pricing a lot. And it's still, even I did an interview last week, and one of the questions I'm applying for another incubator, and I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention. I'm applying for another incubator, and I'm in the final stages of it. They haven't announced that yet, so I need to wait until Monday to mention.
Come back on the Facebook feed and let us know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but they've got that. Well, I need you guys to vote for me, because they've got this community.
Oh, there is an ask.
Yeah, certainly send us a link. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, anyway, so I actually got challenged on it last week in my interview for them as well, in terms of someone saying, well, what about, would you look at increasing your prices? So at the moment, because administratively to have tiered pricing is actually quite difficult for me. I've got flat pricing, but it's something I need. Yeah, it's definitely something I've been challenged on a lot, in terms of being too kind of almost perceived as too cheap, so therefore not good quality. But I really love to be able to get the reputation here for people to understand that the mission is to keep it affordable, but it's still high quality. And that's sort of my focus is high quality, but affordable. So I'm trying to kind of dovetail that together.
I think pricing, it's interesting we hover around this pricing idea, because it's one of the high level questions a lot of people in business ask. How much should I charge my customer, right? And Mark, you would grab, because there's no, like, and Mark and I, we deal with different businesses, sometimes 5 or 6 a day, sometimes hundreds a day, depending on a group. And it's not an easy question to answer, because it's so different for everybody. And if you lined you up with another version of you, another occupational therapist doing exactly the same thing, maybe with a slightly different market, you'd say, well, maybe it would make sense to them to charge more because they're going for a different market. And so this whole concept of adding value, right, is, well, what is value in the mind of the consumer that you're going after? And clearly you're trying to make this thing affordable to people who can't. And so my estimation of that would be, if they're now able to afford something that was way out of reach for them beforehand, they're going to value that.
And that's my hope. Like, that's my that is really my hope. And it's certainly I'm getting really good feedback, and the sales are now starting to come through. And there's like, it's, although sort of special education needs, it sounds like a very niche area. The current statistics released from last year for the UK is 15.5% of children in UK schools are on that register. Yeah. So it's not like 1 or 2 kids. It's like a couple of kids in every classroom. Like, it's 4 children. If you think of a class of 30, 4 children per classroom could do need additional help to access education. So there's a very big market. Like, I was doing this financial planning, I suppose it is, and I need less than 1% of UK schools to purchase for their staff annually, or less than 0.5% of UK teachers. And I was doing the UK market. That's England, actually. It's not even UK, because I was doing the planning for my interview and I was looking at England because that's the focus area. But my stuff is relevant to all English speaking sort of countries. So the market, actually, it's such a small to cover costs. Yeah.
It's one of the things I think the American education system does right. It doesn't do many things right, but this one in particular, they do provide a lot of support, and they do invest in support with special needs, and they have whole schools that are specifically targeted at that.
Well, they do. I mean, and it's legislatively, I mean, you could also, there's an argument within, I actually think it's Silverman's book, Neurotribes. There's an argument that essentially the diagnosis rate went up when I think it's called IDA, the Disability Act in the US, when the US actually legislated for educative support, the diagnosis rate went up, because there was essentially people like, oh, actually, if we get a diagnosis, we can get help. Yeah. Which makes complete sense. But yeah, they definitely do.
That's playing out on a grand scale right now with COVID.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there's definitely, because I know a few people that have taught in special ed in the US as well. Yeah. So the UK is the same. There are special, I mean, I work in
it's the same in Australia. Yeah.
With, it's primarily autism. But I mean,
but do you wonder, I mean, you know, we all look like we're a similar age. I know Mark's like 20 years older than me, but, you know, sorry, man, but do you wonder how many kids, I often think back to my days in primary school or elementary school equivalent in America, and think back to those days, and some of the kids in the class, I thought, you know, and they're just
100%. Like, there was
frameworks, there wasn't the diagnoses, there wasn't the understanding. They were just naughty kids, right?
Yeah, they were naughty kids, or even like there was one boy in my school who had an American accent, and he was clearly autistic. Like, he was Australian, grew up in Townsville. He got his American accent from like Sesame Street.
Yeah.
And it, and you see it here, there's another child, there's a kid over in my current school that has, you'll get these kids and he's not the first, and they turn up with like these accents and you're like, that's
you're saying the kids with American accents are a problem now, are you? It's Australian
like
Australian kids with American accents.
Like it.
I got two. We live in America.
But at least your kids have got a reason for having American accent. Like British or Australian parents that turn up whose kids have got their American accent from television.
I've actually seen that. I've seen that, and with kids, it's interesting. But so what do you? So you said okay. So there's definitely been an increase in these kids and in these cases, and in the need for what you're providing. So what do you think's causing that? Is there anything causing it?
If I had the answer to that, I would be like a billionaire. I think. I personally think there's a combination of factors. So I think there's an increased awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
B, there's an increase in alongside the increase in awareness, there's an increase in acceptance. Mm-hmm. So even nowadays, if you look at different cultures, you have higher diagnostic rates in different cultures, because in some cultures it's just not okay to have a kid with a disability. Mm-hmm. So if unless your child is like clearly disabled, like looks disabled, you're never going to try and put a label on them, because just socially that is so unacceptable.
Particularly when you get into some of the areas like autism, and then you've got your ranges.
100%. So in places like the UK and Australia and America, it's more socially okay, I suppose, to have a diagnosis or to have a child that needs a bit of extra support at school. So there's the increase in awareness, there's an increase in social acceptability of it. There is some evidence that they don't have full evidence as to why something like autism or things like that occur, but there's some evidence to show that older fathers, for example, there's a higher incident of autism in older fathers. There's also things like, for example, stuff like cerebral palsy. If you're premature, if you're under sort of 32 weeks, there's a higher chance. If you're under 28 weeks, there's a much higher chance that you'll have cerebral palsy. And if you think 50 years ago, a 24-weeker would just not have survived. So medically, we're much more able to support,
through those critical moments early on. Yeah.
Well, it isn't, but the thing is, if you're born, the children that are born at 23, 24 weeks, nowadays, medically, we can keep them alive. Yeah. But the chance of them having cerebral palsy or something like that is so much significantly increased. And the chances of them having ADHD or other things like that are much, much higher. And 50 years ago, those kids would not, medically, they would not have survived. And even sort of other diagnoses, like medically, there's so much more advancement these days. Even kids with, like, say, Down syndrome, typically there's cardiac, there's cardiac issues. Yeah. So historically, the cardiac surgery wouldn't have happened, whereas nowadays they're doing cardiac surgery in the womb.
Yeah.
There's medically a lot has changed.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Honestly, and even things like spina bifida, they can do surgery in the womb. Like there's medically so much has changed that it's facilitating life essentially for children that otherwise would have not lived. And then there's whole arguments that don't have clear sound solid evidence to say this is 100% the reason, but lifestyle wise I
agree. It's a combination of factors. I mean, we've got one member of our family that's just very high functioning but on the autism spectrum, and we've tried a whole bunch of things, from diet to to discipline to calm to all sorts of things that all in their own way work, and sometimes they don't, and
I think there's also like, even structurally, like if you look at high functioning, kids with autism typically like structure and boundaries.
Yeah.
So you think about, if you think about even when we were kids, but if you think about even 30 years before that, society had structure and boundaries. You know, I grew up calling my name, like my friends' parents, Mr. and Mrs.
Yes.
As much as you may love or hate it, like religion provides structure and boundaries. And if you think of 100 years ago, there was so much structure and boundary within society that was linked to religion and linked to sort of respect and elders. So there's stuff like that provided structure and boundaries, which isn't there anymore. And there's also, the other thing is movement helps with regulation. So walking and climbing and those kind of things helps with body regulation. And there's whole movements within like mindfulness and meditation and things like that that are looking at the use of physical activity for mental health. And I was listening to a podcast recently, and she was very much saying, like, we don't have, you know, when you used to have to walk somewhere, or the TV, when I was a kid, the cartoons were on for like two hours a day, an hour a day, I think, during the week, and 2 hours Saturday morning. And
mostly on Saturday morning.
Yeah, whereas now those kids
got out of bed.
cartoons 24/7 if they want it. So there's this podcast is very much saying, like, there's no natural downtime really anymore. We're always busy. So that natural downtime to just come and regulate, or that, I grew up in Australia, we were outside all the time as kids, on the trampoline, on the swings, and that movement helps with regulation. So we've taken a lot of that natural downtime, natural boredom, natural movement.
You hit on a word, boredom. I'd like to circle back to that one, but keep going.
Yeah. But like that natural kind of, essentially the stuff that helps to regulate our nervous system. So there's so many things. Like I said, if I had the exact answer, I would be.
Well, but I think that is the answer. Is there is a, I mean, that was what I get to. Is you're providing. You're coming in as an entrepreneur thinking, how do I help these people? Because there's a complex range of issues going on. It's not like my target market has bump, and that's it, which is most entrepreneurs' dream. The reality.
Yeah, and it's interesting in terms of target market, because my original plan was teachers and schools. And I had a lot of advice from mentors that was like, teachers and schools are very hard markets to crack into. Schools don't have any money. Their budgets are low.
Right.
Parents will be easier. Market to the parents, and then they will take it and feed it into the schools. And I did a second accelerator, and it was really one amazing thing my mentor got me to do was to really look at who was my audience. And when I actually did the stats, parents were only making up for 10% of the sales, whereas teachers were making up for like 70%. So in the last sort of 8 months, I've really flipped around to that focus to my original gut feeling. And I had a conversation with someone who's doing a little bit of mentoring for me recently. And in our first conversation, he was very much, our parents will be da 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 da. And I was kind of like, no, I'm looking at the teachers because of da 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 da. And he's sort of, we finished the conversation, and then I sent him all of my information. So like percentages of who's buying, percentages of who's joining, and I'd broken it all down. And he came back to our next meeting, and I was hoping for some like amazing advice. And he was just like, Kim, you're right. I've looked at everything you sent me. You should focus on the teachers. Like, I was so wrong last month, like when we spoke. You totally convinced me. Your data's convinced me. That's where you need to go. So I'm very much looking this year at teachers and schools, and the parents are still sort of there, and the support is still there for them. But my focus on the website and the other stuff is shifting towards teachers and schools, with the hope that then that can fund the extra support for the parents.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's very, very complicated. And so there was something I was going to ask you back when we were talking about pricing and so forth. How much of you played out in the pricing? And I don't even understand this question, but a lot of the dilemma I see with pricing is actually how we value ourselves. Right. Yeah. So I'm just intrigued. Sorry, it's a bit of a jump back, but it's just a question that burns me.
And I've listened to loads and loads of rhetoric's not the right word, like advice and training, and some of the course content creators are like, you should charge £1,000 because that's what you're worth, and then you only need like 10 clients and that'll cover you for the year. And I suppose
because it focuses on the business, not on you and your customer.
Yeah.
Right. And that can be one of the flaws.
Yeah. But for me, I suppose my core motivator when I started was to make this information affordable.
Yep.
And I know that means I need to reach a lot more people to make it sustainable. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of my trade-off, is if my prices are lower, then I need a much bigger audience to make it work. And I've also, like, I have got a tiered sort of pricing. You know, if you want me to come and do face-to-face presentation, nobody's actually taking me. I've just released new pricing on it. But I'm like, you know what, if my training's online, the face-to-face stuff needs to be a much significantly higher amount, because otherwise people are just going to get me to come and speak face-to-face. So my face-to-face speaking is like 5 times the online, pretty much 3. Yeah. Like in terms of for a school. And nobody's come back and said they wanted me to come and do face-to-face presenting, but I'm not. I mean, my focus, I want to do the online, so that's my focus. And if I was constantly doing face-to-face stuff, I won't have time to put it into the online. So what I've tried to do is balance it out in terms of, if you want me face-to-face, this is the charge, but here's the online option, because my focus and my goal is to make this an affordable option for people to access. And I suppose I am still at the moment still contracting and working clinically. So that's what's essentially funded. I'm very much an outlier in a lot of the stuff, because most people in the tech stuff I've done, they all want funding. So like that's their focus, and it's never, I've never been focused on getting funding, and I'm using pre-existing tech. So I don't have my outgoings, like my baseline cost is quite low because I'm using pre-existing technology.
No, it's bootstrapped. There's no doubt about that. And you've taken it cautiously. You've tried this. You've gone through several incubators. You've got a non-executive board of advisors on now. You've looked at all these things. You've constantly changed and upgraded. You've got a couple of interns helping you. All of this is the experimentation stage of entrepreneurialism, because there's no right answer.
No.
There's an answer that works for you and another one that works for a different business.
Yeah.
And it's up to us to find that.
Yeah. So the pricing's still, I'm still navigating it, but
it's just an interesting question, because I think everyone struggles. It is a high level question. I call them high level questions. So these are big questions that actually don't get you anywhere near your strategy. You've got to ask next level questions to actually start, so, well, what's the next level question from pricing? Well, who's my target? Why am I actually doing this in the first place? What do I believe about myself? There's so many things that go on in that whole pricing strategy that we kind of gloss over, and then usually set the wrong price because someone said you got to charge more. And maybe that's correct, but sometimes it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to be able to set up some sort of tiered system. In order to manage it, it'll need to be self-declaring. So essentially, the reality is most people self-declare the lowest, because even there was a period there where I had a donation button for the free course, and like nobody donated. So it's a movable object.
Yeah, oh, it's fascinating. So what's ahead? What's on the horizon? What are you looking towards? Obviously, you've got this incubator.
I actually am feeling a little bit unsure what my next priority should be. So I'm hoping by the end of this month to have. I've been doing some updates on the website, so I'm hoping that's done and out, and my book is written, so that's done and out and off the thinking list. And my focus really for the next 6 months is building more audience and just continually getting more information on the website, because that I get a lot of my traffic comes via my website. So I'm wanting to get more articles and blogs and content on that. There's a few other pieces of content I need to sort out. And then I'm just looking at that sort of networking and getting my name out there. So it's very much about audience and brand awareness. And then, I mean, if I managed to get a place in this other incubator that will then direct some of the time and energy as well. And I'm really hoping they'd be able to help me with the research around the effectiveness of what I'm doing. So that's the other piece. I'm trying to figure out how to demonstrate the effectiveness of what I'm doing.
Fantastic. So, so to other people out there thinking about what you're thinking about or heading down that journey, any tips or advice that you would give them?
So, I mean, I think there's a podcast that Reid Hoffman does called Masters of Scale, and he has one.
Yeah.
He has an episode called The 10 Commandments.
Huh.
Of something, I can't remember, but it's the 10. If you put it in 10 Commandments, it'll come up, and it's really interesting. I listened to it probably when I was 6 months in, and maybe not even 6 months in. And one of the big things he says is like, make sure you talk to people about it. Don't just keep your idea. And I constantly hear this from other people, like you talk about your idea, get the information from the people you're thinking about giving it to, and get not necessarily your friends, but like get that breadth of information on your idea. Friends aren't necessarily always the best.
Well, we've been talking about a book called the Mum Test.
Yeah,
and
it depends on your friends. Like,
the people who are closest to you are going to be nice to you generally.
Yeah. It's also, I think it's useful to find people whose advice you can trust. So like I reached out to Mark because I knew that's what he did. I didn't reach out to some of my other friends because I knew that their advice wasn't going to be particularly helpful. It would be nice, but it wouldn't.
Not in this area. No, their strength is elsewhere.
Yeah. And then I think the other thing, and the more any kind of training you do, it'll very much say, ask your audience, A, create an audience, and B, ask your audience. So there's two books called Traction. They're both quite good. One is the Entrepreneurial Operating System, Gino Wickman, I think. Yeah. And the other was like 19 traction channels to actually get your audience out there or get your audience. And they were very much, when you're starting out, you need to be spending 50% of your time on your product and 50% of the time on your audience. You need to be working on both at the same time, because otherwise you're just going to have a load of people and nothing to give them, or an awesome product or a crap product and nobody coming to it, because and if you're not talking to people that are going to use the product, you're not necessarily going to make it the right product.
Yeah, that's right. This comes up in a lot of conversations we've had, with a couple of the guys like Matt My Apple and when talking with Ryan last week.
Yeah.
And we talked about that marketing is market research and market research is marketing. Don't feel like, because a lot of people feel like I've got to go and do this market research and it feels like a waste of time, right? I mean, obviously you're going to get some data, but that's a great time to market your product too, because you're getting a feel, but you're also talking to people, and if they're really interested, well, they could be the early adopters.
Well, it is, and like people will say, like, set up a landing page to see who joins, because that will give you information around, is there actually people that are interested in what you're doing? So it's definitely don't be in your little silo, take yourself out. And there are lots of, when you start looking for them, there's lots of business advice out there. And some of them are structured programs. The governments have got, like in the UK, there's the EU, I don't know if it'll still be there in January.
Whether you'll still have it in the UK, yeah.
But there's like an EU entrepreneurial kind of or mentoring sort of thing that you can access through your local authority, essentially.
There's a bunch in the US as well.
Yeah, there's lots of little things, and there's lots of quite nichey things as well. So like I ended up in Cambridge Social Ventures because their focus is on social entrepreneurship, and I fitted because I was trying to make it affordable. But then the second thing I did was one for women in technology. So, and the one I'm currently applying for is specific to education. So like there's, and all of the big banks, and like there's so many different, and quite often, like there's one in London that's specifically for certain areas. So like East London, there's one that's out that way and you have to live in a specific postcode to be able to apply for it. So there's lots of advice out there. And I mean, I'm a learner, so I go out. If I have a question, I'll get online and I'll look for information and I'll try and find kind of the best way around it. And I feel that that's put me in reasonably good stead, because I do sit in conversations or in training and kind of, I do know, or I have heard of it stuff, and other people will be like, what's that? And I'm kind of like, oh, okay. Yeah. So like I do active, but that's my, we did this strengths profiling as part of Cambridge Social Ventures, and my second strength is learner. So like I am I do actively, and I'm not afraid to ask the questions.
Questioner, explorer, curiosity, all of those great entrepreneurial skills.
Yeah,
absolutely. All the ones we feel leave us the most vulnerable, and the ones we shouldn't possess, right? We feel like we should have it all together, but it's just
no.
And actually, that would be my last piece of advice. Ask the question. If you're sitting in training, you're sitting somewhere, and you don't know what the acronym is, ask. Yeah. You know, like one of the girls would be sitting next to me, and she'd pass me like a piece of paper, going, "What's B2B? Like, what's SEO?" And
don't worry about B2B. Go to P2P. You know. That's people.
Yeah, there's so many acronyms and stuff. And to be honest, if the person who's running the session can't stop and explain it to you, then potentially it's the wrong session. Or then
and also if you're in a big room, obviously there's that fear of, you know, I'm going to look like an idiot and all that sort of thing. So, but that's fantastic. And I think, you know, I'd love to kind of wind up there. Just that whole, and it's become a common theme, right, Mark? We talk about it, you know, with guys who had to completely re-engineer their marketing. Ryan talking about what he discovered on his journey, and all the people. John Jones, we had way back. You know, he had to really widen his view, and it's that ability to stay open and ask great questions. And part of being open is asking great questions, and actually probably great questions is a bit of a misnomer. Just asking questions. Because you just keep asking questions, eventually you get to the golden one.
How can we make the world a better place? That's what it comes down to. How can we make it better? How can we improve it? How do we?
Yeah, you know, without sounding cheesy, Kim, it sounds like you are making the world a better place. Yeah. And I'd love to hear more about the social aspect and so forth. Obviously, I have a personal interest in what you're doing. Yeah. I've really enjoyed hearing your story and connecting with you, and just some of the information you've given to some of our guys. I think there's some really beautiful takeaways in terms of how you go about things, how you go about price setting, how you go about, you know, keeping yourself open and asking questions and not being fearful of that, and just constantly learning and growing. So, Kim, really appreciate having you here. Mark, it's looking beautiful in the background there. Always good seeing you. So what we're going to do now is go and stop the live feed, and just hold right on there, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kim.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Kim.
See you, Mark.